Namaste to everybody. I hope you guys are doing well. Uh, what a wonderful and exciteful and all of those things week it's been up till this point. Many things happen, many are going on, and so we're uh, we're glad to have this opportunity to welcome you as we continue our journey of truth and trying to find our way home, as it were. Uh, it's funny how long this thing has really been going on of hiding and intentionally deceiving people for a specific purpose. Of course, we know it's been going on in our lives for a long time, but it really is infinitely larger than us. In fact, probably ever since the beginning of mankind, or since we first appeared on this planet, anyways. So tonight we're going to pick up in chapter 4. For those of y'all I've had some tell me just wow, they were blown away with what we shared, and we haven't really gotten into some of the maybe deeper, more complex things that we will, I assure you, although tonight is, one little piece can just expose so much. And so I hope that you have either gotten the book on your phone or you've already purchased the book. We are believing we will probably end up purchasing most of her books before it's over with. The quantity of things that are coming out, and as she talks, you need to understand that after all of this went on, that there was a whole nother movement of the Dead Sea Scrolls. There was a whole revival of the Dead Sea Scrolls. There were scholars such as Robert Eisenman who got the opportunity to work on the Dead Sea Scrolls, who almost lost his house and went to court and won for the release of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And she poses some of that today. Unfortunately, what she didn't know is that there were other people that were coming, that were dealing with different facets and versions of this same thing that we're going to encounter. But I promise you guys, we're going to have probably as clear a picture of the Essenes and what they were, but almost even more so what they weren't. And a couple of the things today, it really taxed me because, we've been so programmed, and I admit it, we were programmed and tied to this thing called the Torah that was supposed to be the truth of God that we could trust, and there was no need to look outside of it because we had all the truth there was. And then to only find out that all of that was just a bunch of bunk and it wasn't anything but some religious lie or concoction to manipulate and control people. And so don't be upset when you hear things like last week when Saudi speaks of Yahweh. Don't be perplexed by that. Those people didn't know they had no clue that the God he was talking about was one in a pantheon of the Canaanite gods. He didn't know that. He lived this thing his whole life in Qumran, and yet had no knowledge of what he was really doing. He was, as we did, he was living by what he was taught. He thought that he could trust the people in his life who were teaching him. And it's not that we can't trust them. They're not lying either. They're just passing along what they've been told, and they had good faith in the people that told them. And so this really isn't that somehow, now I won't necessarily say that about Christianity because most of theirs has been quite intentional. But you'll see as we go along here. So anyways, blessings to each and every one of you. For you guys in Austin, there's a package on the way, should be there Thursday or Friday. We truly are blessed to live in this place and in this time, to find out, number one, most importantly, who source is, and that he's not some great God sitting in a chair in heaven and waiting for the time when he decides to have the rapture. It's some of these themes are just so outlandish when you hear the truth now. But really, most of them are actually a corruption of some things that are very true. So we have to be careful that we don't, as the saying goes, throw the baby out with the bathwater, because the baby's still in the water even if the water's dirty, and that's where we are. The baby is still in the water. The truth is still in the story, but we now just have to discern between what the truth is and what the story is. And so I think we're doing an amazing job, and we just need to continue on, and Source will continue to bring things and confirm, and he will also reveal what's not. And so we really are pretty protected and blessed on that level. Who were the Essenes? Chapter 4 of the book Jesus and the Essenes. Most people still don't know who the Essenes are. Some do. Some have looked at the Dead Sea Scrolls a little bit. What it really means, how different they are, or any of that stuff. The mass majority of people, number one, are really not all that concerned about how it might affect them. And of course, now you come out with this whole thing that really the truth that you didn't know is that Yeshua was an Essene. So now, knowing what the Essenes were, you also get a little clearer picture of what he was. And so I hope you guys are really blessed and growing and learning. And if you're practicing meditation, by all means continue, even if you sometimes have struggles. And if you're not practicing meditation, then you know, it'll hinder you some probably, but you're still probably living a much better life and have more peace and all of those things. So coming to truth is always a blessing. Sometimes it has a price and it's heavy, you know, but it's still better than the lie. So here we go. Before we begin these sessions, if someone had asked me for information about the Essenes and Qumran, I would have told them I knew next to nothing. I wasn't sure how to pronounce their name. The Essenes to me were a mysterious group shrouded in secrecy. I assumed, as others had, that they were a religious group similar to monks, living in isolation in a monastery-type environment. This is what I had heard. There was also a rumor or legend that Jesus may have studied with them or at least visited them. But this idea sounded like all of the other legends about him, legends that he had visited other parts of the world during the lost years. You know, y'all have heard that one. When I've spoken with groups interested in metaphysics, I have received the same reaction. The names are somehow vaguely familiar, but few can supply any information about them. I could not even have told you where Qumran was located. And Harriet had admitted she had no more than I did about this group. I remember the excitement in the early 1950s when the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls burst upon the scene. They were somehow connected with the Essenes and Qumran, and I wondered sometimes what had happened to the unearthed manuscripts. As the first flurry of excitement, they seemed to disappear as surely as if they had been pushed back into the caves from which they had sprung. It seemed a pity because they were said to be an early version of our Bible. Brad Steiger, noted author and expert in reincarnation studies, suggests that regressionists work on verification should delay any research until they have finished their work with the subject or the time period. He says one theory is that through hypnosis, the subject's awareness is greatly heightened. There is always the possibility, no matter how slim, that they could pick up the information from the minds of anyone participating through telepathy or ESP. I believe this was sound advice, and would better ensure the validity of the material. So except for looking at maps to locate Qumran, I bided my time. And after 3 months of working on this, I thought we had enough information that it was at last safe to start my historical research. I was to discover that even today, over 30 years after the excavations of the ruins of Qumran, the Essenes remain a mysterious, secretive group. I was disappointed to find the books were mostly repetitions of each other, All but one were written in the early 50s. They each described the discoveries of the scrolls and the later excavation of Qumran. Each discussed the translations of some of the scrolls that had been found intact, and they all came to the same conclusions about who or what the community was. The authors all referred to each other as experts on the subject, and I might as well have been reading one book. And I wondered why, after all the glowing reports of the greatest discovery in the history of mankind, there was no later books written about further translations of the scrolls. It was as if a door had been opened and then suddenly slammed shut. The one exception was the Essene Heritage by Martin A. Larson, published in 1967, and here at last was a fresh approach. He dared to raise the possibility of a cover-up. That perhaps what had begun to emerge was too much for the conventional church to accept. There were possibly discrepancies between these much older versions and our modern-day Bible. There were also indications that Christianity had not originated full-blown with Jesus, but had its beginnings in the customs and the beliefs of the Essenes. Larson suggests this would not be tolerated by the church. Modern clergy would think that the idea of Christianity before there was a Christ would be too much for the layman to accept. So in other words, you're just not smart enough to deal with the truth. Thank you. Don't you appreciate those kind of compliments? That's about like the government believing that they're not covering something up in North Carolina. Nobody believes it, but they want us to. John Marco Allegro also has his like beliefs. He was originally a member of the international team of 8 scholars who began editing of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Of these men, 4 were Roman Catholics, and he was the only member with non-religious commitment. Ironically, Professor Allegro is now not even permitted to see the scrolls. Wow. If they can do this in that much of a modern era, friends, it really would behoove us to recognize that everything that we've been told is subject to question. But you've been programmed so much so, your mind is so lazy that you don't even want to look to find out. You were told nothing outside of religion is true. Really? And so he was the only member with no religious commitment. Ironically, Professor Allegro is now not even permitted to see the scrolls. At least 400 documents have been pieced together and prepared for publication by the end of the 1960s. But of those 400, only 4 or 5 had been released to the public. And this is where Robert Eisenman came in and put his house up as a mortgage for the lawsuit against some very prominent archaeologists with magazines to expose to the world. Robert Eisenman felt like everyone had a right to find out what went on in Qumran. And so by the end of the 1960s, but only 4 or 5 of them had been released to the public, he also asked searching questions as to why was the information being withheld. And Catholicism has openly, multiple different times, it has been recorded in history that there have been many things that have been said. If what was in the Vatican Library was found, it would totally destroy Christianity. So in other words, he just told you that Christianity is a lie. And now we find them doing the same thing with Qumran. So the scrolls were pushed quietly back into the woodwork, and quite a few of them have all of a sudden disappeared again. You remember they had 400 of them. One theologian was known to remark, "I wish they would just disappear and resurface after about 2 more generations." He meant in this way he would not have to explain them to his flock. I think this is very likely what has happened. I also think they may have found some of the same things which I unearthed during our experiment with Saudi through these past life regressions. and they couldn't handle what they found. So you guys get prepared. I told you, if you'll hang with me, this is going to blow you away about the truth that's been hidden from you. The documents are supposedly not housed in the shrine, or now housed in the Shrine of the Book in Israel. This building was especially built for the study and translation of the scrolls and to act as a depository to facilitate the piecing together of the countless fragments. I know the information in this book could not have come from the minds of anyone involved in the experiment because the information was too obscure. But now I am convinced that it could not have come from the minds of anyone living today, including those people who have read the Dead Sea Scroll documents. I believe we have uncovered a more complete picture of this wonderful group of people than has ever been presented to the world. Do you know how many people haven't heard this? Still think that it's worshiping the devil to find out that we live multiple lives and sex isn't an issue. You are what you come into the world as, and on and on and on and on, and that this stuff might actually be real. If there were ever an attempt to wipe an entire group of people off of the face of the map, that was what happened with the Essenes. There is no mention of them in the Bible. It has been inferred that all references of them have been deliberately deleted because of the similarity between their doctrine and Christianity. And since they were around easy 400 years before Christianity, you can see that causes a problem. Why did they throw all of the Nag Hammadi Gnostic documents? Why were they buried? Because they were supposed to be destroyed, and thank goodness they weren't. And the priests who were supposed to destroy them, in fact, put them in a place, deposited them in a place, and they also were found, and they also totally destroy, which is where we get some of the information about who the true Yeshua even was. He was a mystic. He was a Jewish mystic. He was not a Torah keeper. That's pretty heavy. If it had not been for a few diligent writers and historians who lived at the beginning of the Christian era, we would have no knowledge of the Essenes at all. These ancient authors were Philo, a Jewish Alexandrian philosopher, Pliny, a Roman writer, and Josephus, a Jewish warrior and historian. And I went to the source and read the translations of their works, and I shall refer to them at times throughout this book. Philo is said to have lived between 20 BC and 60 AD, so right in the time. So he could have been alive during that time period that our story covers, but his accounts are said to have been written by hearsay. He was not personally acquainted with the Essenes or their community. This might explain any discrepancies between his account and Josephus. Pliny lived from 23 AD to 79 AD, so he was there all the way to the destruction of the wall. He knew everything that happened to James, which opens up a whole new door about James and Yeshua. It may be understandable now why Yeshua could not stay even after he was crucified, why he went to Tibet and was a spiritual leader in Kashmir, India, because he also did not agree with James, even though James was his brother, which is shocking as heck. So he would have lived during that time that our story covers, but his accounts have said to have been written by hearsay. He was not personally acquainted with the Essenes or their community. This might explain any discrepancies between his account and Josephus. Pliny lived about 23 AD to 79 AD and wrote only a small amount concerning the Essenes. Josephus is considered to be the most reliable source and the most quoted. He was born in Jerusalem about 37 AD and actually lived within the community and had firsthand knowledge of them during their latter days. He also was grandfathered to the emperor of Rome, and he also caused all of the people who were under his command on Masada to commit suicide and kill themselves with a pact that all of them would do the same. And funny enough, Josephus comes out and everybody else is dead and Josephus is alive. Josephus was considered to be the most reliable source we have. He was born in Jerusalem about 37 AD and actually lived within the community and had first-hand knowledge of them during their latter days. But it is said that he tended to color his report to make it harmonize with the systems of the Greek philosophy popular at this time, which is a really kind way of saying that he turned coat to the Romans, which is exactly what happened. He lived and wrote from a later time period than the life of Sadi. Yet these histories verify the incredible amount of accuracy we uncovered in our experiment. The descriptions of lifestyle and beliefs dovetail very well. These are the only known records about the mysterious Essenes. These authors only mentioned that the strange community was located in the Dead Sea area. Archaeologists never knew exactly where and had never tried to find Qumran. The terrible climate of the area is a scientist's nightmare, and they had no desire to hunt for it without a specific reason. After the destruction of Qumran by the campaigning Roman armies in 68 AD, the ruins sat atop the salt cliffs by the Dead Sea for almost 2,000 years. Crumbling in desolate silence, they went virtually unnoticed. The men who had devoted their lives to accumulation and preservation of knowledge seemed to have completely disappeared beneath the relentless sun and shifting sands of the desert. It was as if they had never existed, although the ruins stood as a silent reminder of the great minds that once flourished there. They were not recognized for what they were. For ages, people thought they were merely the remnants of one of the many Roman garrisons that sprang up after the invasion. Surely nothing of any importance could have flourished in such a God-forsaken spot. The ruins were ignored completely until the discovery of the first Dead Sea Scroll in 1947. The caves in the salt cliffs had held tightly to their secrets for 2,000 years. Then fate took a hand and led the Bedouin shepherd boy searching for his lost goat to discover of the hidden scrolls and jars in a cave. The story of this exciting find has been told and retold. It is certain that much was probably lost or inadvertently destroyed before the enormity of the discovery was made known to the outside world, and the scientists descended on the desert. With the help of the native Arabs, more and more scrolls and tens of thousands of fragments were uncovered from neighboring caves. What was at first believed to be an isolated lucky find was soon being heralded as the greatest discovery in the history of mankind. As more caves yielded up their hidden treasure of knowledge, archaeologists began to wonder how such an accumulation came to be hidden in the desert. Only then did they begin to look questioningly at the nearby ruins. Maybe it was something more than just an army garrison. Maybe there were some connection. The first excavations in the winter of 1951 turned up nothing to support the theory, but during 52 it was proven conclusively that the scrolls had originally come from whoever had lived in the ruins. Then the writings of Philo, Pliny, and Josephus began to shed light on who the occupants might have been. Everything finally fell into place, and Qumran was declared the home of the secretive, communistic Essenes. The word communistic has taken on a very different meaning in our world today, and some questions have arisen over my using this word to describe this ancient group. The Essenes were considered communistic in the purest sense of the word. They lived together in a community, sharing everything and needing no money, which was what Yeshua left the followers, and you find that at the beginning of what we were taught was the church. You find Peter delegating out. Nobody owned anything. If you needed something, you came to him. Folks, all that was, Yeshua instituted what he had already been living, and I'm supposing his followers had probably already been living. All that is known today about these people has come from the ancient writings and what the archaeologists found in 3 years of digging. There are many gaps and questions. Maybe our experiment will help supply some answers. The description of Qumran. The archaeologists believed the group living at Qumran was a religious order of men similar to monks, secluded from the world they could not identify with. They believed the Essenes lived by a strict code of discipline and rigid rules. I shall attempt to show you that many of the scientists' ideas of these wonderful people are incorrect, and that's a kind way of saying or write out lies. According to the information received through Katie while she was in a deep trance, I have compiled all of the information together about the community of Qumran and will present it in one chapter. Although it actually was scattered throughout the many sessions, Katie often repeated the same descriptions but she never contradicted herself. I believe the picture that emerged through the eyes of Sadi is much more human than the one revealed by the scientist's shovels. I felt that in order to understand this person I had uncovered, I had to know more about the place where he lived and his way of life, especially since this would also reflect the conditions under which Jesus lived during the most vulnerable part of his life. When I talked with Sadi as a child, he called the place a community. He never called it anything else. He did not understand the word town or village and did not know of any other place but Qumran. This is also what the archaeologists have called it, and they say it is not a city. In his description, Sadi said, "It is not very large, but it is a place where there are many people. There are libraries, the houses, the temple. We are all in the hills and we overlook the sea. The buildings are of clay, they are made of bricks, and they have flat roofs, and everything is built together." He said most of the walls joined each other. I was confused when he said the community was enclosed by a wall that had 6 sides, and it sounded strange, but the odd thing is when you look at the drawing of archaeologist excavation, you can see it is definitely not square. It may be debated whether or not it is a 6-sided shape because it's not a geometrical 6-sided figure. It is also apparent from the drawing that the rooms mostly all connect. Most are built with common walls, and at times when I talked to Sadi as a child, he was playing in a courtyard, and when he was older, he also liked to sit and meditate in one of these. So there's another thing, a little piece that comes right out. What were they doing? Even in Qumran, they were practicing meditation. He said there were several courtyards within the community. I am accustomed to a courtyard being in the center of something, but these were scattered throughout. He said the study and the library were in the very center where everyone gathered for classes. The papyri or scrolls were also stored there. In one of the courtyards there were fountains, in the others there were gardens. Not gardens as I would have assumed, but beautiful flower gardens. They are the colors of the rainbow. They are like many jewels that sparkle. That was a statement made by Sadi. And I wondered how they were able to grow flowers in such a hot place. I didn't think much of anything would grow in the desert, but he objected. Oh, but they do. Flowers grow in the desert as long as there is rain. As long as there is water, the heat does not matter. When the rains come in the spring, that the desert is all abloom. For the seeds that have been dropped will suddenly burst forth into flowers, and the desert can be very beautiful. In the courtyard located near the eating areas, there were fruit trees. There are the trees that they grew up, the figs and dates and pomegranate, orange and lemon. It's almost as if they touch the sky, and there are pathways that you can walk amongst them, or you may sit amongst the flowers and ground yourself. I'm quite sure other than their sandals, there was nothing to keep their feet from touching Mother Earth quite often. By again referring to the drawing, it can be seen that there are indeed several courtyards. In all the diagrams, however, the archaeologists have pictured the courtyards as being barren, which is what a modern person might do. They thought little would grow in the Qumran area because of the scarcity of water. They knew grains were grown because they had excavated around a spring known as the Ein Feshka, which was located 2 miles to the south, and they thought this was the Essenes agriculture area and concluded that the isolated people subsisted on this cultivation and the keeping of bees, eating only meager, monotonous food. But the ancient writers disagree with this. Pliny mentions that the Essenes lived amongst palm trees. Solinus says palm berries are their food, which would be referring to dates. This was thought to be a mistake until the archaeologists dug up remains of date palms and date seeds. It seems Sadi was correct about trees growing in Qumran. Wow. Sadi said that the majority of the Essenes did not live within the community walls. There were housing for the families farther up the hill to the north, outside the main complex. These houses apparently had the same building arrangement as the community, the joining together of the buildings with common walls, and the archaeologists believed the people lived in caves and tents, which seemed strange to me. Why would they build such a beautifully efficient community and then go and live under primitive conditions? And you've been taught that in the Bible. As far as I've been able to find out, I do not believe many excavations have been performed in the area away from the walls. Their reports mention only digging in the main complex and exhuming some of the graves in the adjoining cemetery. Incidentally, the scientists still believe there was only a brotherhood of monks living in Qumran until they found the skeletons of women and children in the cemetery. They had to quickly revise their thinking, for it was apparent that families lived there. I watched a National Geographic thing where they said, oh, well, those must have been strangers who came along and died. That's why there were women in the cemetery. Sadi's family lived farther up the hill than most. He could look out of the house and see across the Dead Sea for a long distance. The only people who lived within the community itself were the priests of Yahweh, who took care of the temple, the scrolls, and kept the fires lit. Sadi lived with his mother, father, and sister Sarah, and I asked for a description of the living quarters. When the weather was hot, they would sleep out on the flat roof. When it was cooler, he shared a room with his sister. There was a room which was considered the family room where the meals were cooked. His parents had their own bedroom, and there was another room where his father studied, which was full of many papyri. The quarters shared common walls with the other families. The archaeologists have assumed from the ruins that everyone always ate together in a large dining hall within the community complex, which is exactly what they tell you. But Sadi says the families mostly ate in their own quarters. If there was a great occasion when someone would come to speak, then they would go to the main dining hall. The Essenes believed that there would be less conflict if everyone had an area that was their own. The library and the dining hall were both large rectangular rooms. Covered openings in the roofs allowed the light to enter. There were also openings in the walls which were covered to keep the sand out. He was not sure which was the largest building because he had not stepped them off. The most common way of entering the community from the outside was through a gateway next to a high cliff. It was large enough to take a caravan through if need be. When I asked if there were any other ways of coming in, he acknowledged cautiously that there were, but would offer no further information. This was apparently one of the many subjects that I was to find he was not allowed to talk about. The Essenes were extremely secretive in many respects, and I was to have difficulty breaking through this defensive barrier. He said there were several buildings that had more than a single story, and the library had a second floor. The assembly hall, the dining hall, had the height for 2 floors, but there was only the tall ceiling. He said the tower near the gate had 3 floors, and the archaeologists mentioned that there was evidence that some of the rooms had 2 floors. They said the tower had 2 stories, but they also mentioned a basement for storage, which would be the equivalent of the 3rd. The purpose of the tower was mostly for observation. From this vantage point, the Essenes could see anyone approaching the community. Sadi mentioned it was also used for protection, but when I asked him to elaborate, he refused to answer. This was another forbidden subject. When he grew older, he no longer lived with his parents in the housing, but he had moved to a part reserved for unmarried young adults. Here, the men and women lived in what he called apartments, although he wasn't sure of that word. Where they had had their meals was an individual preference. While living in these quarters, he often ate with the others for companionship and conversation. There were many tables in the dining room or hall of meals, but the cooking was done in rooms off of the hall or outside in clay ovens. The scientists have said that the Essenes all ate together in the dining hall while solemnly observing ceremonies or rituals they went on while they were eating. Sadi disagreed. He said there were only the blessing and that no teaching or anything else was done while the meal was in process. And if y'all haven't seen this, you might go watch the National Geographic. They have a huge documentary about all that the Essenes done. And everything that she's saying, friends, is exactly what they teach. Okay? That it was all this great thing. And if you happened to look and somebody fell down and you saw their bare legs, then it was horrible. And if you waved to somebody, it was horrible. These were the most unfriendly people in the earth. And some of this has come up. There probably were some of those things because of the secretiveness. But there's a whole lot of stuff that is said. This is the only opportunity we will ever have to hear a perspective that seems to come from that. Until maybe they release more of the writings of the Essenes, and it may be in there, and that may be why they hide it. Some of the things that are coming up here that get exposed are really pretty crazy. They make you have to ask some questions. So, the scientists say that they all ate together, but Sadi disagreed. He said there was only the blessing and that no teaching or anything else was done while the meal was in progress. It was also believed that they observed strict religious rituals during the day. Again, Sadi disagreed, saying nothing was mandatory. It was left up to the individual. For the most part, any religious observances were on the Sabbath. If the people wished to eat in their own quarters, they would go to one of the keepers of the stores, take what they need. They would not go hungry, but there would be no gluttony allowed. I was curious about the types of food that would be eaten. Millet was a main staple. This was a type of grain that was raised outside, probably at Ein Fresca. After it was harvested, the grains were winnowed and stored in great sacks, and he described a dish made from millet. To prepare it, you would take a handful in a pot of boiling water and throw it in with a little salt. Sometimes herbs were added. It sounded like a soup, but he said that you could roll it and eat it with your hands, so it may have been some kind of a bread or probably more appropriately some kind of a mush. Different types of meat were eaten, lamb and goat, occasionally an ox or a young bullock, and different types of birds. And I remembered the food laws in the Old Testament and asked about any restrictions. He said, "You may not partake of swine or anything that the hoof has been uncloven. The swine, it eats anything. It would eat dung if this is what it's fed. It would not matter. Therefore, it is considered unclean. You may eat only those with the cloven hoof that chew the cud. The camel chews the cud, but we do not eat camels." He personally did not like to eat meat, although there was no strict rule forbidding those in the community to do so. So here's something I want you to see for all the people who are saying, don't you know Jesus and all the others were vegetarians? If they were vegetarians, dear one, it was because they made a choice to be a vegetarian. Pure and simple. It wasn't mandatory, you know. I met some people, and if you ate meat, you were the scum of the earth. These are some really top-rated scholars, and they looked down on anybody who ate meat. Because, you know, they knew the Essenes. They had researched and done archaeology, and you should believe them. He personally did not like to eat meat, although there is no rule forbidding those in the community to do so. It was his personal choice. This was his statement. It is not good to kill something for your own, just for enjoyment. This is God's creature you are destroying. To eat meat is to tie one here, to tie one's soul to the earth. So he believed that there was a concept by killing and eating meat. And in truth, he had no understanding or revelation that in reality, spiritually, in the spirit realm, killing a plant is exactly the same thing as killing an animal. We've also been lied to about those things, as you saw on Saturday. He did not understand the word beverages, but they drank wine, water, and sometimes the milk of different animals. As a trick, I asked about coffee, but he said, "I do not know this. This is not familiar to me." I had had teas that were made from mints and different types of leaves, Vegetables was another word he did not understand even after much explanation. Other things were eaten besides the grain and fruit, but these were brought by the passing caravans. He described the furniture in the living quarters. There are bed frames that have ropes that are crisscrossed in which to make a frame, and then the padding and all is put on top of this, and this is how you sleep on this. There are chairs and tables, and if you wish to sleep or relax, take a cushion and sit on the floor. It is again preference. The frame of the bed was about a foot high. He did not understand what I meant when I asked about blankets or covers. When I explained, he answered, "There is no reason to have these blankets. It would be too much. If you lived in the mountains, perhaps you would need them." So in other words, at night the temperatures didn't drop. He also didn't know that what a pillow was, but since he had used the word cushion, I knew he would recognize that word. He could not understand why we would want to put a cushion under the head while sleeping. The head is not elevated. The ideal way of sleeping is to have the feet higher than the head, no aid in circulation. To elevate the head, then you would have problems with your feet swelling. You do not. To elevate the head would be to bring about headaches and many other problems. To elevate the feet would aid in the circulation of the body and stop it settling down. They would either put a cushion beneath the feet or tilt the bed. The only other furnishings in the house were shelves that they could put things on, such as clothing and things of that nature. I asked about decorations and he frowned, confused again. I was thinking about pictures or statues. The word statues disturbed him. This is going to really give you a kicker because everybody thought I was really hard. Listen to what the truth probably was. Give me just 1 second. Let me get this. Okay. We do not have statues. There are not statues made. We would occasionally have a painting, but there are no statues allowed in the community. It is to copy what God has made. It is not allowed in the commandments to make of a graven image, even if it wasn't meant to be the God. You just got the proper understanding of "you shall make no graven images." Has nothing to do with you bowing down to it. The commandment was don't make it. Even if it wasn't meant to be a god. For instance, a statue of an animal. Many false gods are worshipped as animals. I tried to explain that some people like to have statues and paintings in their houses just because they were beautiful to look at. They did not intend to be used in worship, but Saudi couldn't understand this concept. I would look at nature and find the beauty in this. Why look at a rough imitation when the real thing is before you? I can understand the beauty and the need to create, but could you not create many things far greater? The paintings are very beautiful. When I asked for an explanation of the paintings, I was not expecting the type he was familiar with. They were painted on papyri or wood and hung about the house, but they were not pictures of objects or living things such as we would have. They sounded more like some type of an abstract painting. Colors and the way the lights and shapes and ... I do not paint. So Zadi's just telling us he don't know how to explain to you other than colors and types and shapes, but of course I'm not a painter. I am not explaining this very well. They are things that speak to the soul. They are from within rather than what the eyes would see. So now we're talking about some kind of spiritual from inside paintings that someone would have. What might bring somebody to have a vision, and then they paint it. They would have meaning only to the one that paints them. When I asked for an explanation of the paintings, I was not expecting the type he was familiar with. They were painted on papyri or wood and hung about the house, but they were not pictures of objects and living things such as we would have. Colors and the way the lights and shapes, I do not paint. I am not explaining this very well. They are things that speak to the soul. They are from within rather than what the eyes would see. They are what the soul sees. That was just a kicker right there, man. They would have meaning only to the one that paints them. What about the Romans? They have many statues, don't they? Yes, but they are heathens, and they worship them. They have them having qualities that are not there. They are just stone. Sound just like Abraham. Do they actually worship the statue itself, or do they worship an idea behind it? They are all differences. Some of them worship the statue as real. Others say that it's just what it represents. Either covenant seems to be a very dangerous idea. He was very shocked when I asked if he had ever been inside a Roman temple. I've spoken with Romans about their beliefs, but in their temples they slay animals and they defile the name of worship. It has become something of horror and unclean. There is one in Bethesda, that is the only one I know of. I've heard of one in Jerusalem and different ones. Capernaum is said to have one, of course. Tiberias has the temple that was built by their emperor. Tiberius was pronounced fast and the syllables slurred together. I asked about Nazareth, but he said the village was too small. They would not bother to put one there. I thought he may have wanted to see one out of curiosity, but the idea was repulsive to him. Our temple starts from within. Listen, this is so beautiful because Yeshua says something very similar to this. Our temple starts from within. Wow. It spreads without. You need no house or chamber to hold it. You see that he's already just right there. If you think about what he just said, he is exposing the light that is in us that comes out. How else could something come out of you? Why did Yeshua say, don't you know you are light? Why would he teach, don't hide your light under a basket? It's everywhere. I've always thought that the temple and the synagogue were the same place with different names, and I remembered the story of Jesus in the Bible when he was found in the temple teaching the doctors. A temple is only for the worship of Elohim, but the synagogue is also a place of teaching. The temple, it has the Holy of Holies, where in the synagogue perhaps they only have the sanctum for the Torah. The temple is to God, the synagogue is for the worship in the manner of the Jewish faith. So a synagogue is totally a Jewish creation. So any person practicing another religion would come into the temple, but not into the synagogue? Yes. Now you can't find this. Yes, in the synagogue there is a place for the Gentiles. We know that that's true. And also a woman's court. And in the temple, all are allowed who worship God. Although the Bible mentioned Jesus questioning the doctors, Sadi did not know that word. What he considered a healer was called a physician, and this type of person would only teach his specialty. They would not teach in the temple. Apparently, what is meant in the Bible is someone like a teacher who is very learned, perhaps a master. Those who would teach in the temple are teachers of the law. They are priests. Each have their own specialty. Like one would have law and another would have the mysteries, and others would be speaking of different knowledge that has been passed on down. Once again, all esoteric connotations if you understand what's really being said. A rabbi would be different. He teaches Jewish law and Jewish religion, as it were. Here's a new perception for you that you've never considered. Do you think that it's possible that when Yeshua said, let no man call you rabbi, he was talking about let no man call you a Jewish teacher? You just heard the understanding of something that's written in the Christian Bible. Why? Because it really comes off, I have to be honest with you, he's going to expose, it's almost an anti-Torah, anti-Jewish sect, and Yeshua was too. And I suspect we're going to find John was too, which is why they killed him. So a rabbi would be different. he teaches Jewish law and Jewish religion as it were. I asked for a description of the temple at Qumran, and I got more than I bargained for. This is the area where the people would gather. They would kneel or sit on the floor, and then there is the altar. Behind the altar is the curtain, the inner sanctum, which has the veil across. And inside there, the Torah and the scrolls are kept, Kabbalah. During the studies or celebrations of holy days, whatever is occurring, they would bring this forth and read of them and share. There would be the sharing of souls, then discussing the dealings of God and life and many things. In the synagogue, the women are not allowed except in the women's court. Here, in the temple, all are allowed. Are there any religious objects in the temple, for instance, on the altar? There is the cup, and usually an incense burner, and that is truly all. What purpose does the cup have? What is the significance of it? It is the passing between all, and sharing in this manner, it bonds us together, and it makes us one. Just so you know, this is 100 years before Yeshua. It's really crazy. But look at the concept. The bonding together of us all being one. You can find that all over New Age teaching. We're all one. We're all one. We're all one. We're all one. Friend, that's 5,000 years old. They knew that. It's been hidden from us, but they knew it. There was an unexpected familiarity about this. Harriet excitedly asked, "Everyone drinks from the same cup? What do they drink? Water? There's usually wine." This was a significant new development. What Sadi was describing sounded like Holy Communion or Lord's Supper, but this is supposed to be connected with Christ, and he was not yet born. Sadi said no food was passed at this time. I was thinking about the bread or the wafer in communion. Only the cup was passed around amongst the people. It is the cup of lifeblood. It is the sharing of life between us all. Those are mystical, metaphysical statements, friends. The wine represents the blood of all and the sharing together. This is the significance. It means that everyone is of one blood. Are only those members of the Essenes community allowed to partake of the cup? One must have accepted the precepts to be able to share of the oneness, partly due to the fact that they would perhaps not understand what the point that is trying to be brought with this. It is not that we do not believe that they are one with us, so there's another key giveaway. It wasn't that they didn't believe that we're all one. It just simply means because we do believe that. Totally different concept from the whole Jewish thing. It's just that the sharing is brought about in their own time. If they are not ready for it, it is not stressed. So you're not going to go to hell, like Paul says, if you don't break bread together. And I assure you, Paul knew that. Thus, a stranger passing through would not be allowed to participate in this. This ritual was performed at ceremonies where everyone would be together and able to attend. It was done on the Sabbath, but was not restricted to that day. Sadi said that to his knowledge, this ceremony was not performed by the Jewish community at large. So, I felt this was an important discovery. Apparently, when Jesus performed the Last Supper with his disciples in the upper room, he was not instituting a new ritual. He was using one he had participated in many times with the Essenes. The symbolism of the bread is said to be a Jewish custom. Had nothing to do with the rest. I think he combined this with the custom of passing the cup and gave it a new meaning. To the Essenes, this ceremony symbolized that they were all of one blood in the sharing of life between us all. And then to Dolores' kindness, I will also say that I believe that all of that about Yeshua and the breaking the bread together was a concoction of Rome. to corrupt what the Essenes had done. They don't want you. Why does our government want us so divided? Why do they generate racism? Why do they want to cause division? Because the only way to keep people weak is to keep them divided. If we all came together under source love, we would destroy this government, and it would not take a long time to do so. But we're divided, so nobody wants to fight together. Nobody wants to protect each other. Nobody cares about their neighbor. It's all self, self, self. We will be a communistic society again. What could be more natural than Jesus wanting to perform this on the eve of his trials and eventual death? It was to be one last show of brotherhood between himself and his followers. So along those contexts, now you see how that wouldn't have been so outrageous, but all of this has been hidden from us. Sandalwood was burned in the incense burner because it is said that it can help open some of the sinner's chakras within ourself. Again, I am not familiar with the teachings of all of the mysteries and the ceremonies. Whereas the passing of the cup was strictly a rite of the Essenes, other religions did use the incense, even the Romans. So when you know that little piece of information, it makes it really easy to understand that he was an Essene, because that was something that they did, not something the Jews did. It occurred to me that if they had had one type of ritual that was familiar to the Christian church, they might have another one. And I took a chance and I asked about baptism. And Saudi seemed confused, puzzled, because he was not familiar with that word. It's a washing, a ceremonial cleansing with water. Saudi. There is a ceremony of cleansing. After a person has had his bar mitzvah, they are taken out and they have to be considered to reach the age of consent, and they choose to follow the path of Yahweh or perhaps to fall off. If they choose to follow this, they are cleansed in the waters, and it is said that they are washing away their past, and from this point they shall start anew. There are different ways of doing it. Some pour the water over, some make them lie down in or upon the water. Would you go down to the Dead Sea to do this? No, no one would go into the Sea of Death. It is usually done in one of the fountains here. Are there any special clothes that they would wear at this time? Either a robe made out of flax or none at all. It is part of the purification, the stripping bare of the soul. Does the priest perform the ceremony? Yes, or an elder. Usually, this is only done once in a person's life. This would explain where John the Baptist got the idea for the ritual of baptism. When he was baptizing people in the Jordan River, it was nothing new. He was merely following the existing customs of the Essenes. Wow. But you don't need to know what the Essenes really were, or what they were doing, or what they weren't doing. The translators of the Dead Sea Scrolls are aware of this coincidence. I found that there are numerous references to these two ceremonies in the scrolls. Many of these experts have come to the conclusion that this directly ties John the Baptist to the Essenes. It indicates that he was under their influence at some times in his life. The Essenes dressed quite simply. Both men and women wore a plain robe made either of sheep's hair that was spun and woven or of flaxen. And of course you know that they didn't wear both, which is where that comes out. Or of flaxen that has been processed, or linen. The robes were gathered at the waist and they touched the floor. They were considered to be cool. Underneath the robes, the men wore a breechcloth. Both sexes wore sandals. The robes were always white, although sometimes it was more of the color of rich cream of the cows. 'Tis not quite white. It rarely got cool enough to wear anything else, but if it did, they had cloaks of various colors, and the adult males wore a beard. It is a sign of belonging to the men community, not a commandment. which is the reason you notice Amish men that are married. It is a sign of Amish married men that are part of the community wear the beard. No different. Thousands of years apart, but they came to the same conclusion. Is it mandatory? Not really. If you choose not to, don't. If you choose to, all the better for you. It rarely got cool enough to wear anything else, but if it did, they had cloaks of various colors. The male wore a beard. It is a sign of belonging to the men community. Outside Qumran, there were people who chose to be clean-shaven. There are communities that never cut their hair. The Roman wear their short. For us, it is permissible at any length, as long as this is well-groomed and clean. Most prefer it to be about the shoulders, which is why you always see the pictures of Yeshua wearing shoulder-length hair. Doesn't that make sense? If anyone left the community to go into the outside world, they were required to dress like the other people so they would not appear different. The outsiders did not wear white robes. They wore colored clothes with various headdresses. So in this way, the Essenes were unique and would have been quickly recognized that they would have stood out amongst the others. The ancient writings confirm these facts about their dress. It must be remembered that the Essenes were in danger when they were outside of their walls, but as long as no one knew who they were safe. As Saudi said, "We do not have blue skin." Apparently, they could not be easily recognized when they dressed like everyone else. But when in Qumran, everyone wore the same uniform, so to speak. It would seem as though they were all absolutely identical, but they did have a method of identifying rank. They wore a cloth band tied across their forehead. These bands were different colors according to the wearer's standing in the community. It was like a badge of office, so they could quickly identify each other's status. Like the color gray, it is for the young students, and the color green, they are a seeker. They are above the student's level. They have finished that which everyone must learn, but they are still seeking more. They are still recently admitted, and their soul still searches for knowledge. They are still a student, but they are not a master, and there are the blue, which is the master, and there is the white, which is the elder, and there is the red, and he is really not a member of any of these others. He is outside of this. He is learning, but perhaps for different purposes. This is for the outside students as if he is only a visitor. The red shows us, though, they are of a like mind, that they are perhaps not quite of us. It is really just the green, the blue, and the white that are of ours, and then the gray for the young students. Then if someone is wearing a red band, they don't live there all the time. Well, it's not that you do not live here all the time. It is perhaps that they are from elsewhere to come to learn, to seek, and to study. Then when they finish studying, they will go away again. Did they choose these colors for a reason? The blue shows much of the inner peace. It is almost up to the level of the white, and the white is the ultimate in attainment. The masters, the ascended masters, if you really want to look at that in proper perspective. You are at total rest and have achieved all that must be achieved. You have taken care of all of your karma. They're talking about an ascended master. You are at total rest and you have achieved all that must be achieved. The blue is just one step below this, if this is to be understood. These colored headbands were also worn by women since they were considered equal to the men and were also taught. He couldn't understand my surprise when I said in some community girls aren't taught anything. He responds, but how could if a girl was not taught, how could she stay one with her husband? Or, I do not understand. Wow. We were very pleased with this way of thinking, which must have been against the popular Jewish customs at the time. This would explain some of the Jesus attitudes towards women. They had not been treated any differently in Qumran during his time there. If a woman was not a student, she could wear a scarf or a veil according to her choosing, but mostly they wore nothing on their heads. So once again, what is it? It's all free will. At the time I was speaking to him, he was wearing green. It means that I am a student. I am one step below a master. I am not an unborn student. I am a searcher. The younger ones would wear gray. During the session when Saudi was describing the living conditions of Qumran, Katie was in a deep trance, but she suddenly and unexpectedly slapped her right cheek, surprising us. Normally, outside of hand motions and gestures to describe something, such swift movements did not occur. Later, she began scratching the spot she had slapped, and Saudi stated simply, the bugs are getting bad. I found this very amusing because it was so unexpected. He said they were mainly gnats, little flying things, but there were many types of bugs there in Qumran, of which locusts and ants were a problem. And when I asked about dangerous insects which might inflict a poisonous bite, he said he did not know of any, although he himself was not into the study of lower life. There were animals raised for food, sheep and goats and oxen, but I got the impression these were not kept at Qumran. They were probably outside the walls or near Einfeschke, where the agriculture was located. We got into an interesting and fruitless discussion when I asked if they had pets. He did not know the word. This is often the case when I'm dealing with people from another culture. They do not understand or have an equivalent word. I'm always taken off guard because quite often, as in this case, the word is a common one to us. I often have to come up with suitable explanation quickly, and this is difficult. Try it sometime. I tried to think fast and find a definition for the word pet. Dolores. Well, it would be an animal no one would eat. Someone takes an animal and makes it their own. They just keep it for their own pleasure as a pet. This sounds selfish. How do we know that the animal has different pleasures from this? Remember, I've told you about the Akashic Record, and when you go over there, the judgment that you're going to receive is the judgment that you get to see how you made other things. No protection for you. There's not one word that has anything to do with the Akashic Record about you. It's about what you did to everyone else. That's pretty amazing. That is the judgment of how you treated other people, not how they treated you. Well, it would be an animal no one would eat. Someone takes an animal and makes it his own. This sounds selfish. How do we know that the animal has different pleasures from this? Maybe your dog don't want to live with you. Sounds like in their mind that if a dog doesn't want to live with you, a dog should not be then made to live with you. Well, it would be like a friend. How can an animal be a friend? It has not intelligent conversation. So how can it be your friend when you don't even know what it's saying inside? He seemed totally confused, and I said, some people like to have animals with them. They live in their quarters with them. This does not sound, his response, this does not sound very sanitary. We laughed. I didn't realize how difficult it would be to explain. No matter what I said, it did not seem to get any clearer. I asked if he knew what a cat or a dog was, and he knew the word cat, but not dog. Frowning, he said, I've seen jackals. I suppose this was the best mental picture he could come up with for the word dog, and I explained that they were similar but not quite the same. I do not think anyone could own a cat. This is curious. Why would someone want to have something as a pet that eats dead animals? I would not want one to live with me. They all have vermin. That is not good. Vermin carry disease. We use sulfur to keep them away. It was apparent I would not be able to define what we consider pets, so I went on. I wanted to know if there was any trouble with snakes in the community, and he said there are many adders that varied in size. They ranged from quite small to quite large, several arm lengths long. They occasionally got inside the community, and when they were killed, because the bite of most were fatal, And I was surprised by the admission that his people did kill sometimes. He had seemed so much against harming any of God's creatures and against any kind of violence, and he said they would kill if there was a danger. I was still trying to find out if they would ever use any kind of protection if they were threatened. He had indicated earlier that there was something, but it was one of the forbidden topics of discussion. This time when I asked if there was anything else they would consider a danger, he again went on the defensive and refused to answer. Anytime this happened, it was always best to change the subject. During my questioning, I often found that Qumran was far from primitive. I came across him once while he was bathing. He said this was something that was done daily, usually in the morning. The room of bathing was a large room where the bath comprised about almost the entire room. There were steps leading down into the pool, and there was an area to the side where there were benches for disrobing. They would remove all their clothes to enter the water. Many people, both male and female, would bathe at the same time using pumice instead of any kind of soap. The water came into the pool from somewhere underground. It was a steady flow, always being refreshed and changed. He did not know where the water flowed to because he said he did not design nor build the system, but he believed the areas that the water ran through were covered. And I suspect if someone were to ask your average modern city dweller about their water system, they would also have difficulty explaining it unless they had some reason for being involved with its workings. There were places in the community where the water came to the surface. The drinking water was obtained from 2 fountains, and I thought maybe he meant a well, but he was quite emphatic in his definitions. He knew what a well was, and he said it was not that. It is where the water comes up from below and pushes up. It comes from the mountains and comes up out of the ground. There is an area that is for storage of this water that holds quite a bit of water. It is square and perhaps as deep as a man's waist, and 1.5 again, as many lengths as his arm stretched. During the hottest months, many times they are kept covered so the water will not be wasted and the dust will not get in to foul them. The water was removed with buckets and they had only to reach down and dip it out. This surprised me because the area around Qumran is so arid. I did not think that they would have a steady flow of water. How not so? With this close to the Sea of Death, there is water here. It comes from many sources. As long as it is not in the sea, it is all right for drinking. I wanted to find out if there were any sanitary systems that took care of urination and bowel movements. According to the Bible, Deuteronomy 23:12 through 14, the people in Mosaic times were not allowed to do this within the city, as it was unclean. They had to go outside the walls, dig a hole, and cover it up afterwards. Saudi was an expert on Jewish law, so I wondered what he would say about this, and I wasn't sure how to word it. I had no idea what other cultures would find offensive, Whenever people have to urinate for sanitary reasons, would you have to go outside the walls to do this? And his response, no, there is a place that is used for this body function. It is a room that has several sections. He was looking for the right word, cubicles, in which you would urinate or have a bowel movement. I believe it is a pit system dug and they were freshened. I was not very sure about the method that they would use in taking it away. It was within the community walls and everyone went to the same place. There was water in these cubicles, but he did not know if it was also flowing water such as in the bath. There are things that are put in with the water that is there to keep it fresh. Isn't it in Jewish law that they have to go outside the city? I know not. And what if a man had to wake up in the night and he laughed? Would he then leave the city? So apparently all of the Jewish laws were not in effect amongst all of the people. It is doubtful that other cities in Israel had the wonders of sanitation and water supply that were present in Qumran, but the Essenes apparently had access to much information, possibly this type of engineering knowledge. When the archaeologists excavated the ruins of Qumran, they were amazed at the wonderful complex water system they found. There were 2 baths with steps leading down into them, several cisterns, as the scientists called them, and water storage basins. There were also many small canals connecting the whole system, which was probably covered over during the times the Essenes lived there. It is interesting to note that the scientists have assumed that the baths were open, while Sadi says they were enclosed within rooms and that the storage areas and the fountains were open. They also assumed the Essenes trapped water down from the hills during the very infrequent rains and stored it in this system, but Pierre Devaux said that during the 3 years he and his party were at the excavation site, water only came down from the hills twice. It is hard to believe that they could have stored enough water to last for long periods of time if they had to depend upon the unpredictable rainfall. Sadi said the water was flowing. I believe they have found a spring and routed the water to flow through the community. I believe that over the intervening period of 2,000 years, something happened to the spring, either through earthquakes or natural ground shifts. There are known springs in the area, the most notable one at Einfeschke, a few miles to the south. Why would the Essenes have put their agriculture area by a spring and then build their community in a barren area? Also, when the Romans destroyed the community, it is known that they ruined the water system. Maybe they, through ignorance, closed off the source of the water. The archaeologists found the remains of what they called a sanitary system, some kind of cesspool. They also discovered the ruins of a building with cubicles, which they had assumed was a stable. Was it? As to Sadi's daily schedule, usually I would awaken with the sun and I would go and bathe, and then I would break my fast, study for a period of time, and then begin lessons or go about the day's teaching, and break off again and eat midday meal. Then usually I would study. There is much I am in ignorance of. Then I have the evening meal and I spend my evenings in contemplation. Do you have to rise with the sun? This is one of the things the scientists have assumed. It is just a matter of custom. It depends on what you do. There are those who would study the stars. They would, of course, stay up all night and sleep during the day. If you are studying the stars, you would not get up and spend all day awake and fall asleep when the stars are out. There are those who work late into the night, but most of us rise with the sun. Is there any set time you go to bed at night? No, not generally. If there are things that you would have to do that would carry it on late into the evening, it could be just studying. I could be speaking with one who hasn't been there for a period of time, numerous things. If they stayed up after sundown, they obviously had means of producing light. I was aware that they had used lamps containing olive oil in that part of the world. I had gained this information from other subjects, but I should have learned by now not to take anything for granted when using this method to delve into the past. While working with Katie, I never knew where an innocent question might lead. When asked about their lighting methods, his answer was unexpected and proved again that Qumran was not an ordinary place. Its walls held many hidden mysteries. We'd have either the lamps of oil or the lamps that burned. When working with regression, you must stay alert and be ready to pick up and follow through on anything that sounds the least bit unusual, since it is something common to their way of life. They will not elaborate unless you pursue it with questioning. You never know what it may lead. This is one of those examples. Why did he mention 2 types of lamps? Usually I use the one that has oil in it and then lit, but there are also the lights that have light with no flame. What is the power source? He had difficulty explaining it. I did not build it. I do not know. It runs off of a jar that is placed on it. The jar has some properties. It is placed upon the jar that has a, searching for the word, globe, that comes off of it. That is literal. The jar is about, so he measured with his hands, and it looked about like 5 inches tall. By a globe, do you mean a globe of glass? He hesitated. What is glass? How do you explain that? Maybe you don't have it in your community. Glass is a material, but it's something you can see through, like a pottery, but it's clear. This was difficult. He responds, "Sounds interesting. It is somewhat like this, yes. I do not know how it is made." Harriet suggested the idea of something similar to a crystal material, and he answered with an emphatic yes. This would be similar to glass. At least it was a material that you could see through. So he had something for comparison. And I asked if the round globe was like a sphere, and he became excited that he had finally made me understand. But when I asked if the sphere was hollow, he became confused again. "I know not about these things. I do not design them. But it sits on top of the jar, and the jar is pottery. Is that right?" "I know not. It looks of stone." "Is there anything inside the jar?" "I have not taken it apart to find out." He was getting aggravated with my repeated questionings, but I wanted to understand how this strange device operated. If possible, for such a thing should not have existed. I wondered if it remained on all the time and could not be turned off. No, it was turned off and on by placing it. Either you have the type that you would place inside of another jar, and this would cause it to light, or you would have one that would be given a twist, and then it would cause it to light. But it was never, it is never on constantly unless it is something you wish. And I asked if he liked it better than the lamp with the oil, and he said the strange one was much brighter, and there was not the danger of fire. "Are these made at the community?" "No, they are very old." That's a key thing. "They must have great power source to have lasted such a long time. Are there very many of them in the community?" "There are enough. I have not taken count of them. They are everywhere. They are allowed to be where they are needed." In my research, I found the descriptions of the objects that Pierre Deveau, the archaeologist, excavated from the ruins of Qumran. Among them, any shards of pottery he found, a few stone jars, and a few fragments of glass. Could they have been the remains of the lamps, not recognized for what they were? The thought of a jar working in this manner awakened a memory. I remember reading something similar in one of Erich von Daniken's books. His works contain many unexplained oddities. I found it on page 174, picture 252, "In Search of the Ancient Gods." It was a picture of a small jar about the size that Saudi had indicated, and it showed someone inserting an oblong black metal object into the jar. The inscription said that it was a battery operating on a galvanic principle. It was very old, but even today, 1.5 volts could still be coaxed from it. It is now in the Iraq Museum in Baghdad. So they had means of producing power that they could carry that would not burn things down 4,000 years ago. Wow. I went and did some research myself, and that's exactly what this is. It is a battery. It is a battery in every sense of the word, and it generates power. It leads my mind to think about a picture that constantly perplexes archaeologists and Egyptologists. And there is a picture where there are men, it was in one of the tombs, and there are these great bubbles that are drawn with these squiggly lines that are inside of them, and they have a solid base. One would have to ask, if you go look at the picture, there's two of them, and they're like this. They're elongated glass tubes is what you would perceive them to be, with an element in the middle of it. That looks exactly like bulbs, and they had that over 5,000 years ago. We may not be as advanced as you think we are. So to some investigators, including Dr. Koenig, that these might be dry cell batteries, which understandably were no longer in working condition after several thousand years. However, when they were exactly reconstructed and provided with a new electrolyte, they worked. This ancient use of electricity may, of course, prove only that electric power was used for electroplating metal with gold and silver, as is still done in the bazaars in the Middle East. But it is also likely that it was used for the illumination of temples and palaces, although its use disappeared from the middle epoch of antiquity, that of the Greeks and the Romans, who used oil for illumination. Berlin and Iraq museums. Mankind has become very smug, thinking he is the first to invent our modern conveniences. It appears that ancient man was not as primitive as we believe. They actually had many of these things, and since the blackout of the Dark Ages, we have merely rediscovered them. An intriguing idea. I wondered what other surprises might lie within the secretive and protected walls of Qumran. Chapter 6. Well, I hope you guys gleaned the things. There, little by little, this is going to come to pieces, and it's like every time I sit down and read, I'm going to take it something solid away. When I go back and I ponder this whole concept of what we were taught by Catholicism was communion and baptism, and we find out that it wasn't at all what was presented to us through the Roman Catholic Church. And I know many of you think you're Pentecostal, but really you're Roman Catholic. We all were Roman Catholic. And so I hope that you guys will grab a hold. You say, well, why is this important? Well, it's really not important unless you want to understand. If you're not interested in understanding how we got to where we are, because some of you, like myself, have come to the conclusion and understanding that there may have been some misleading things taught to us under the guise of religion, if I could. You might have come to that conclusion. And if you did, then that's why this is important. Because the more that we know and understand, just as doing the meditation and doing shadow work, the more that you understand the pain that you have inside of you, and the more that you release and reveal and become conscious. Remember, I know that there's many people out there who are unconscious still, and they literally are exactly what that word implies. They are not conscious. Not as we've always understood consciousness, but as the spirit realm understands consciousness. That's what's going on. That's the thing that's coming. There's many things, I believe, friends. There's enough people channeling, and I listen to them a bunch. And there's stuff coming from every venue, and I mean from channeling and from psychics, and they're all saying very similar things, that we are headed to a really tumultuous time, but we will go through it if we continue to walk with Source, and we will get the opportunity. I heard it today. You will have an opportunity to choose for yourself higher frequency. That means you're going to first gain knowledge of higher frequency, and then you're going to choose to not accept it. Not accidental, not unintentional. You will make a conscious, conscientious decision to not accept the truth that's being put in front of you. Wow. That's coming. Do you understand? That's something that's coming within 2 or 3 years. It immediately took my mind to the whole story Christianity concocted about the devil's going to try to come and he's going to make you deny Jesus. And if you deny Jesus, then you're doomed forever. There's no hope for you. Do you see how it was one thing turned around to manipulate and control people, but where it came from was not what it was? And how many times have we seen that? I mean, if you live, his understanding of pig blows away any reasoning in the Torah. I mean, I can see walking with a guy like this, and he goes, well, why would you want to eat something that eats dung? That would have been the reasoning. Why? Because it's just not clean. It's not some supernatural unclean. It's just not clean. And you can see that in the way that he approaches the animals. Why? Because if you did those things that we do now, because now you can wash your dog and your kitty cat, and your dog and kitty cat lives better than the humans did 500 years ago. And so that changed some of that. But his perspective is very plain. It's always about taking care of ourselves. One must love oneself. How can you do things that you know are going to kill you and even try to think for a minute that you love yourself. And I know that's a harsh word, but it's still true nonetheless. If you loved yourself, you would want to do everything you could possibly do to build up, strengthen, heal, encourage, nourish, right? You wouldn't want to spend your time. You wouldn't want to go find the list of all the things you can do to hurt yourself. If you really loved yourself, you would go find the list of all the things you can do that won't hurt you. Do you see? And it's very common sense, very simple, complex. And really, that's what the hippie movement is doing and is still doing even in this new age time in which we live. What are we supposed to do? Well, we need to eat closer to the earth. To him, he wouldn't have understood because he couldn't understand that our food is made up of 20 gazillion chemicals. You know, he probably might come to our time and go, I ain't eating this. But there's lots of people out there that are saying those same words, dear ones, that we should be trying to eat close to the ground. I fully believe that. I have no problem. I don't like paying more money for organic things, but when I do pay more money for organic things, I do it because I feel like there's a benefit there of not putting those pesticides in myself, right? So actually I feel that way about 99% of the food. I just don't have the money to eat totally organic. If I ever get the money, I'll eat totally organic. But until then, I have to also survive like every one of you. And so I compromise and do what I can do to get organics into my life, to get sugar out of my life. Many other things. Loving yourself. If there is a greatest command, that's got to be at least the second one, if it's not the greatest one. Because I believe Source wants us to love ourselves. I believe that's really important to him, that we first learn to love ourselves, because we can't truly love anyone. So that would mean then that Source loves himself, as that is visualized from a human perspective. Source must be okay with himself, who he is. And there's so many people that live in our society that are so fractured and hate themselves. Living quiet lives, as the guy told me when I was a child. Most people live lives of quiet desperation, Rob. That guy was a millionaire. It was an amazing piece of wisdom that he shared with me. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be that person. I don't want to live a life of quiet desperation. I want to live a life full of abundance and peace and joy and happiness and love and kindness. I mean, those sound like honorable things to me. So I hope you guys, I know there's hard ears. I know there's a lot of people that don't want to hear this, and that's okay. I get that. That has nothing to do with this. This is for those people who have a desire. And so I hope you guys will take a hold of it. It's really a unique opportunity that we have, to find these truths out. Quite amazing, actually. To me, I hope to you too. Namaste.